Welcome to a sleepy journey. But not a boring one. Tonight, we'll turn the pages of the tumultuous history of the Ashkenazi Jews, from their earliest exiles to the deeply ingrained memories of resistance flowing through their veins. You're crouching in the candlelit corner of a small stone room in Fustat, the old capital of Egypt. The air is thick with the soft scent of burning olive oil and warm parchment. You're not here to witness a debate over law or a market haggle over lentils. Tonight, the scribe sitting before you is not writing a contract, but something far more dangerous, a love letter. His reed pen scratches rhythmically across the page, dipping every few lines into a shallow ceramic inkwell filled with iron gall ink. His hands are steady. His eyes flick up to the doorway now and then. And on the floor, a folded cloth hides what looks like a second letter, unfinished. Perhaps that one didn't quite say what he wanted it to. Outside, the street bustles faintly, low voices, a child's cry, the clatter of sandals against packed dirt. You're surrounded by the everyday noise of a medieval Jewish neighborhood, but here in this room, something private, risky, and rather sweet is taking shape. The letter starts with formalities. May your days be many and your feet unweary upon the path of wisdom, a typical formula that might have appeared in a note to a rabbi or a merchant. But the next line swerves suddenly. Since the day I saw you pour water into your jar near the well, my soul has been restless in its house. Well now, you try not to smile. A religious Jew, writing in flowing Judeo-Arabic, choosing metaphors from scripture and the Song of Songs to confess his desire, this is no Hallmark card. This is Talmud meets poetry, meets actual longing. And he's good, you note the paper. Not parchment, this time. Cheap linen rag paper imported from Amalfi, likely repurposed from an accounting sheet. The other side, still faintly visible, lists 3 names and their unpaid debts. It's oddly appropriate. Love, too, often deals in emotional IOUs. Behind him, tucked in a niche on the wall, sits a small bundle of earlier drafts. Some smudged, others sharply folded. You wonder how many of them were sent, how many were too bold, and how many were intercepted by a nosy brother or disapproving uncle. Romantic expression in this world is a calculated risk. Especially in a culture where modesty and indirectness are prized, even expected. He writes in the first person but cloaks his identity in scriptural allusions. He calls her the lily among thorns, and signs only with the Hebrew letter Yod. Not exactly anonymous, but close. The art of courtship, at least here, lies halfway between admiration and plausible deniability. His pen pauses. He mutters aloud. You lean in slightly and catch a whisper, too much. No, maybe just enough. He continues. He seals the bottom line with a final flourish, and if the stars approve, may your eyes find these words before the Sabbath lights are lit. He leans back. Breathes out. He doesn't smile, but his eyes soften. You might think, why all this drama? Couldn't he just talk to her? And in theory, yes. But between communal expectations, language codes, family mediation, and the general weight of exile and halakha, love in this time requires more strategy than a game of chess, and maybe more sincerity than modern dating apps have ever known. You shift slightly and notice a wax seal nearby. It bears the image of a pomegranate, a modest symbol of abundance and righteousness. He takes a dab of wax from the oil lamp and presses the seal down slowly. One moment of heat, a breath to cool, and then, done. You can hear your heartbeat louder than the streets now. Historians still debate whether these letters were meant to be saved or discarded. Some argue that the writers, especially the women, saw them as fleeting, a form of private speech never meant for posterity. But the Geniza had other plans. That Geniza, the sacred storage chamber for any scrap containing Hebrew letters, would one day become a vast time capsule of feelings unspoken and risks quietly taken, but that comes later. For now, you're just here, kneeling in a corner beside a man quietly burning with affection, drafting his desire in ink and metaphor. Outside, the sky deepens to indigo. Inside, the page still glows faintly from the last flicker of lamplight, and somewhere, not far from here, a woman is washing vegetables for Shabbat, unaware that a piece of her future just dried in a stranger's hand. you step carefully out of the scribe's candlelit room and onto the uneven stones of the courtyard. The scent of dust and warm water fills the air. Someone has just poured out a basin used to scrub vegetables. A cat slips past your leg, tail raised like a punctuation mark, as you follow the imagined path of the letter now folded in the scribe's palm. But he won't deliver it himself. That's not how it works here, in this world, 11th century Fustat. Or perhaps Granada, or Aleppo, or Fez, love rarely travels in straight lines. It takes detours through bakers, cousins, laundrywomen, or if you're lucky, a slightly deaf grandmother. You are now standing beside one of the key figures in this social choreography, the go-between. He's a chicken seller. Or at least, he sells chickens most of the day. But right now, he's the unofficial postal service for half the alley. His name might be Abraham or Suleiman or something in between, but everyone just calls him the Legs. Because his legs, skinny as rushes, move quickly between households with baskets, messages, and sometimes pastries, and always stories, you watch as the scribe nods slightly and slips the sealed letter into a folded cloth pouch already hanging from the man's belt. No words are exchanged. That would be too obvious. The man simply finishes tying the sack, makes a joke about the price of grain, and vanishes down the alley with the mild bounce of a man pretending to be harmless. You follow, the alley narrows. Woven laundry overhead sways slightly, casting patterned shadows across the walls. A rooster clucks irritably from a cage. Somewhere, someone is plucking a lute. Life continues. But within this rhythm, your courier is weaving something private into the weave of the ordinary. He turns once, twice, then stops beneath a latticed balcony. The wood is dark with age, and behind its patterned cuts, you glimpse a pair of eyes, briefly. He taps his sandal twice on the stone. A pause. Then a small rustle above. A basket slowly lowers on a rope. No one speaks, inside the basket. Nothing, for now. That's the trick. The exchange happens next time. Today is only for the drop. He tucks the letter in, along with a few sprigs of fresh mint, why not make it fragrant, and places a wedge of flatbread over it like a blanket. He gives the rope a small tug, and the basket rises slowly, gently wobbling as it ascends. You might think this whole operation is too subtle to work. But in a society where eye contact can carry as much weight as a kiss, and where one's honor might hinge on a glance, this is the grand gesture. Historians still debate how often these messages were intercepted or misunderstood. There are letters in the Cairo Geniza filled with confusion. Why didn't you respond? I sent my reply. Did your cousin read it instead? Love is hard enough. Love with middlemen and baskets and misheard names. Near impossible, but it persisted. Your courier walks on, blending once more into the day's chores. Somewhere behind you, the girl at the balcony lifts a corner of bread and finds the sealed note. She doesn't open it yet. That would be obvious. Instead, she waits. She listens. She hides it in the folds of her robe, and you drift past another courtyard, this one quieter. A young boy is practicing his letters in sand with a stick. He writes, Aleph, Bet, Gimel, and then scrawls a little heart. Not a true one, of course. Just two curves that meet, like two birds touching wings. You wonder who taught him that. You're standing now in a shaded passage near a bakery, where the air is warm and smells of yeast and ash. The morning heat is still polite, noontime will be less forgiving, but for now, everything is gentle. A boy carries a basket of loaves wrapped in old cloth. A woman lifts a lid on a bubbling pot. A camel snorts somewhere beyond the archway. All around you, signs of ordinary life, except that you're following something not so ordinary. This time, the letter isn't being delivered by a chicken seller or passed up in a rope basket. This time, the lovers are a little bolder, or a little luckier. You trail behind a girl of perhaps 16 who carries nothing more suspicious than a jar of olives. But in her sash, tucked carefully under the hem of her tunic, there's a folded piece of parchment bearing a verse that took 3 days to write. She's not the recipient. She's the cousin. Or the friend. Or maybe just the neighbor. Her role in this story is temporary but essential, what later historians will call a social vector and what grandmothers will call bad news waiting to happen. Still, she walks like someone delivering milk, not emotion. She turns left, then right, nods to a spice merchant whose fanning flies off a scale, and ducks beneath a woven curtain into a small courtyard where fig trees lean lazily over a water basin. There, seated on a reed mat, is the girl who waits. Let's call her Miriam. She doesn't look like a rebel. Her sleeves are rolled just enough to show her arms, stained with pomegranate juice. She's shelling nuts, slowly, one by one. You notice the faintest crease of worry on her brow. She hasn't heard from him in 3 weeks. Or maybe she has, but the reply never came. Or maybe she answered too boldly and now regrets it. The messenger girl says nothing. Just lays the olives beside her and slips her a knowing glance. Something flickers behind Miriam's eyes. She excuses herself quietly and retreats into the storage room. There, away from her mother's voice and her little brother's humming, she opens the note. It begins not with her name, but with a poetic rebus. A combination of Hebrew letters and Aramaic numerals meant to spell "Your shadow is a blessing to my breath." You know because you peek over her shoulder. You're nosy like that. The lines are steeped in midrashic allusions. He compares her to Rachel by the well, to Esther in the palace, to the dove that refused to leave the ark until peace had returned. And he closes with a coded question, perhaps too bold for daylight. If your father asks about the bread, say it was too sweet for vinegar. You're not quite sure what it means. Neither is she. That's half the thrill. She hides the letter beneath a mat woven from palm fronds. She rubs a bit of ash on her fingers and returns to the courtyard like nothing happened. She laughs at a joke from the fig vendor, and the world goes on. Historians still debate how women learned to read and write in this period. Some suggest literacy among Jewish women was rare. Others point to growing evidence, letters, inscriptions, marginalia, that women not only read, but answered back. You don't have to decide now. You're simply watching a girl who knows what she's doing. She might answer tonight. Or not. Maybe she'll test him with silence. Maybe she'll send a reply folded inside a packet of preserved lemons, scrawled on the back of a poem her brother left lying around. Or maybe she'll let him worry a little longer. What's love without the waiting? Either way, the letter has landed. The message is received, and you linger for a moment in the shade, listening to the soft sound of figs dropping to earth, one by one. Now you find yourself seated on a slanted wooden bench in a candlelit chamber not much larger than a stable. The air is dry and papery. You're surrounded by scrolls, letters, torn accounts, and, most surprisingly, poetry. This is not a scribe's home, nor a merchant's shop. You're inside the famous Geniza of the Ben Ezra synagogue in Fustat. A Geniza, if you've somehow dozed through earlier episodes, is a sacred storage space where Jews place any written text bearing the name of God. But in practice, especially in medieval Egypt, it became a kind of literary afterlife, a tomb of paper. Nothing was ever thrown away. Shopping lists, wedding contracts, letters about fish prices, jokes scribbled on receipt margins. Everything went in. Especially love letters. You trail your fingers across a bundle bound in coarse twine. A scholar in modern spectacles, not part of your current century, leans in beside you and gently pulls one loose. She reads aloud in a whisper. The letter is in Aramaic, written in an elegant but rushed hand. The writer addresses a woman as "my song in exile," comparing her silence to the destruction of the Second Temple. He apologizes for something. You don't catch what. But the emotion is thick, equal parts devotion and dread. You can imagine the writer, a young man far from home, perhaps in Baghdad, perhaps in Jerusalem, his stomach full of chickpeas and regret. His words spill out like wine on a table, uncontained, maybe a little sticky, probably not proofread. But they reach across centuries, clinging to the parchment like breath on cold glass. The Geniza kept this one safe. For nearly 1,000 years. Rats nibbled at its corners. Dust layered over it like a soft blanket. But the ink held. you lean back and think, love doesn't always shout. Sometimes it hides inside bureaucracy. A scribbled poem on the back of a tax form. A kiss metaphor tucked between two legal citations, one particularly odd letter catches your eye. Written in Judeo-Arabic, Arabic in Hebrew letters, it opens with a blessing for someone's health, then launches into a meandering complaint about geese. But halfway down, the tone changes. When I saw you yesterday at the market, you did not turn your eyes toward me. Have I offended you, or is it that your cousin now speaks sweeter words than I? It's unclear if this is a love letter or a poultry invoice with romantic footnotes. Historians still argue about how to classify many of these fragments. Was that poem truly personal, or copied from a book? Is that line about missing someone actually about missing a business partner? Did everyone just talk like this back then? You chuckle under your breath. That's the problem with poetic Jews. Everyone's always quoting Isaiah, even when they're mad about being ghosted. The Geniza offers no answers. Just traces. A paper trail of yearning, sealed up in a dry attic for centuries. A scholar once wrote that the Cairo Geniza is like a time capsule with its lid left ajar, just enough for air to get in, just enough for stories to survive, and survive they did. You wander further into the paper stacks. A note flutters down from a crumbling folder. You catch it mid-air. It's written by a woman, her hand curved, confident. She writes to her absent husband, and between the usual domestic updates, so-and-so's goats have multiplied, the almonds came late this year, she adds, I wish you would come home before my heart forgets the sound of your footsteps. You feel something tighten in your chest. Maybe it's the quiet of the room. Maybe it's the dust. Maybe it's the realization that for every letter preserved, hundreds, thousands, were lost, but this one survived, and so did the feeling. You wander through the late afternoon haze toward a synagogue courtyard where the shadows are long and cooling. The clink of metal cups, the soft arguments over prayer order, the rustle of parchment, all these sounds blend into the architecture. But you're not here for Torah or tax ledgers. You're here for poetry written in Aramaic, smuggled into the margins of law. A young man sits cross-legged on a low stool, not far from a wall inscribed with names of donors. In his lap, a folded parchment bears the unmistakable spidery scrawl of a Geniza letter. But this isn't a business deal or a betrothal contract. This is sighing, yearning, and metaphor, all in Aramaic. He's reading it aloud. Softly. Perhaps to himself. Perhaps for a friend just out of frame. The tone is humble but rhythmic, with long-lost cadences shaped by Babylonian exile and local accents. You listen closely. As the dust clings to the sandals of your gait, so clings my soul to the path that leads to your smile. A little much? Perhaps. But it works. The Aramaic is not the Talmudic register of halakhic debate. It's a gentler dialect, vernacular, poetic, personal. This was once the shared language of longing for many Jews across the Near East. And just as Yiddish would centuries later carry jokes, insults, and lullabies all at once, this Aramaic carried the heartbreak of boys with soft hands and little money. You peer at the letter again. There's a crude drawing at the bottom, a pair of joined pomegranates, and a name erased, scratched out in hurried strokes. You get the sense it was copied from somewhere. A shared verse, passed around like secret currency. Historians still argue whether most of these letters were originals or recycled lines. Some phrases appear again and again, like, I am a vessel, your word is the wine. Were these clichés of the time, or inside jokes among students of the academy? Or perhaps they were safe phrases, public metaphors for private truths. You drift to another corner of the courtyard, where an older man sits with 3 boys, teaching them how to write in both Hebrew and Aramaic. One boy rolls his eyes as he tries to copy a complicated ligature. Another snorts when asked to write beloved without smudging the ink. The teacher doesn't scold. He simply raises a brow and says, if you cannot write the word without shaking, you will never write it truthfully. Is that a proverb or a threat? Hard to say. Nearby, you notice another parchment discarded on a bench. Half of it is a fragment of legal discussion about grain tithes. The other half? A poem about a girl whose voice made a scholar forget the Talmud for an entire morning. Scandalous. Sort of, in this world, flirtation lives in margins, literally. On the edges of commentaries, between columns of kosher rules. You find tiny scrawled lines that feel very out of place and yet entirely human. The scribes, after all, were not machines. They grew tired, distracted. Their hands slipped. Their thoughts wandered. And sometimes, what they wrote when no one was looking is more honest than anything they copied for pay. You glance up. The sky is shifting into that coppery tone that precedes twilight. A bell rings softly to call evening prayers, and the boys scatter, parchment tucked under arms. The young man with the Aramaic letter folds it carefully, tucks it into his sash, and walks away. You wonder where he's going. Maybe to read it again under a fig tree. Maybe to burn it. Maybe to write his own. Still bolder, and maybe, just maybe, to tuck it gently into the crack of a doorway with a prayer, that someone might find it, read it, and blush. The morning has broken again, and with it comes the scent of roasted cardamom and boiling vinegar drifting through the narrow lanes of the market. You're walking among rows of merchants and scribes, the shuffle of sandals on packed earth beneath your feet. You pause near a small stall where spices are being measured, not in scoops, but in clever metaphors. This cinnamon is as sharp as her refusal, the merchant quips, handing a sachet to a customer who grins and blushes, but your eyes are drawn past the spices, to the edge of a colonnade where a man in fine robes, dark blue, with gold embroidery worn thin at the cuffs, is seated on a folded mat. He dips a reed pen into a pot of ink, turns to a fresh sheet of parchment, and begins to write. This man is not a lover. He is a professional scribe. And today, he's writing someone else's love letter. You watch as a nervous young merchant, likely in his early 20s, paces nearby with his hands twisting a string of date pits. He mutters instructions under his breath, not too bold. But make it memorable. And say something about her hair. No, wait, her voice. That's safer. The scribe glances up, gives a single nod, and begins. He's done this before. He knows how to balance the required humility with a pinch of flirtation. He knows the right combination of psalms and song of songs to give the words a whiff of holiness without spoiling the romance. He knows how to hide declarations behind metaphors so layered, even her father couldn't object, unless he was secretly a poet himself. And the fee? 3 copper coins and a loaf of yesterday's bread. Not bad for 20 lines of longing. The parchment is smooth, fresh, imported from Tripoli. The ink flows easily. The scribe writes with a calm precision, but every so often, he pauses. Not to think, but to smile. You realize he's not just transcribing feelings, he's upgrading them. Instead of "I miss you," he writes, "Since our eyes parted, my thoughts have wandered like goats at dusk." Instead of "Please reply," he writes, "If your silence continues, I shall consult the stars, for they might be kinder." The merchant nods enthusiastically. Yes. That's good. Add something about her laughter too. The scribe obliges. With a little extra flair, you get the feeling he's enjoying this, perhaps too much. Maybe he sees himself as a romantic proxy. Maybe this is the only kind of flirting he's allowed. Or maybe, just maybe, he's written the same phrases so often they've begun to sound like memories instead of commissions. Historians still debate the level of originality in these ghostwritten letters. Some claim scribes reused stock phrases across dozens of clients. Others believe certain scribes developed signature styles, a kind of medieval voice. Like having your love letter written by the Maimonides of Mush, as the final lines are penned, the scribe dots each Hebrew character with care. He draws a tiny bird in the margin, a subtle signature of sorts. Then, without looking up, he asks, "Would you like a tear stain on the corner?" No charge, but it adds urgency. The merchant hesitates, then nods. The scribe dips a cloth in vinegar, touches the parchment delicately, and blows on the damp spot. Drama. Even before delivery, the letter is folded, sealed, and placed into a small leather pouch. It will be delivered by a cousin on the way to the bathhouse. Which of course is a lie, but one everyone agrees to maintain. You stay behind for a moment as the merchant rushes off. The scribe stretches his fingers, then pulls out another sheet and begins a new letter, this one in Arabic. A different client. A different metaphor. But the same subtle joy in every curve of ink. You wonder, does he keep copies for himself? Does he ever reuse a line because it worked too well the first time? Does he dream of someone writing one for him? You don't know. But you do know this: somewhere, a girl will read those goats at dusk words and either laugh, blush, or roll her eyes, and somewhere else, a scribe will smile into his inkpot, wondering which. The sun is dipping low now, casting slanted golden light through the latticed windows of an upper room above a merchant's courtyard. This room, small, neat, and thick with the scent of pressed linens and rose water, isn't the scene of a grand romance or dramatic confession. No. This is where the reply is written. You're standing behind a young woman who is supposed to be mending a tunic. The needle rests forgotten in her lap. Her fingers, instead, are smudged with ink. She leans over a low writing board, tongue pressed against the inside of her cheek in deep concentration. And before her lies a square of parchment. No bigger than a hand span. This is her second attempt. The first one was too flowery. The second, this one, feels sharper. She isn't sure if she wants to encourage the man, challenge him, or confuse him entirely. And so, naturally, she does all three. She begins, "Your goats wander at dusk," you said. Perhaps they should be penned before sunset. Savage. And poetic. Very on brand, she continues. A few lines of banter, a quote from Proverbs, a word fitly spoken is like apples of gold in settings of silver, and a final rhetorical question: do you write to all the girls, or just the ones near wells? Oof. He's going to lose sleep over that one. You admire her precision. Her handwriting is clean, the spacing careful, the ink a fine walnut brown she made herself. She folds the page not once but thrice, tucking it into a scrap of cloth embroidered with her initials in Judeo-Arabic script. She doesn't seal it. That would imply trust. Instead, she slips it under a layer of dried mint in a shallow basket meant for her aunt. You watch as she gathers the laundry around it, casual, practiced, and hands it off to a houseboy who has delivered things for years and never once asked a question. You get the sense that this isn't her first note. Or even her first admirer. Historians still debate how much autonomy Jewish women had in romantic matters during the medieval period. While most formal marriages were arranged through family negotiations, the Geniza letters hint at a rich world of flirtation and emotion unfolding beneath that official surface, full of wit, longing, and veiled sarcasm written in 2 or more languages. The girl now resumes her sewing. She hums softly, not a tune exactly, but a rhythm, something between a prayer and a dare. She's satisfied with her reply. Or perhaps she regrets every word of it. But that's the nature of letters. Once sent, they belong to the reader. You linger for a moment, imagining the man's face as he reads her note. The way he'll search every line for affection and find, instead, a mirror. Or a challenge. Behind you, the last sliver of sunlight disappears, and oil lamps begin to glow. One flickers beside her elbow, casting long shadows across the fabric she stitches. She's sewing now with great focus. The ink on her fingers has dried. The letter is gone, and somewhere, 2 hearts are about to play chess, with metaphors as pawns. The lamps are lit now, small clay bowls with short, flickering wicks, and their orange glow trembles across the courtyard walls. You find yourself beneath a balcony where 3 teenage boys sit hunched over a wax tablet, arguing in low voices about rhyme schemes. One of them is chewing on a reed. Another is drawing circles in the dust with his foot. The third looks like he hasn't slept since last Sabbath. Welcome to the Midnight Poets Society. They're not supposed to be writing love poems. Technically, they're supposed to be revising a Talmudic commentary due next week. But their hearts, like all hearts at this age, have wandered from obligation to imagination. And so they huddle here in the dark, composing verses for women they dare not speak to in daylight. One of them reads aloud, "If your gaze were a question, my silence would be its answer." The others groan, "That's not even halakhically sound," one says, half joking. "Try again." You lean in, amused. The line wasn't bad, but here, in this tiny attic of lamp smoke and hormonal turmoil, the standards are oddly high. These boys write in Hebrew mostly, but sometimes toss in Arabic phrases when the rhyme demands it. Occasionally, one slips into Aramaic to seem clever, or uses a Persian metaphor they picked up from a traveling spice seller. Their poems are stitched together from half-remembered psalms, wedding blessings, and dinner-table insults, plus a fair amount of blushing guesswork. One of them, Shlomo, perhaps, insists that the poem should reference Jacob waiting 7 years for Rachel. Another argues for something more classical, like comparing her beauty to the walls of Jerusalem at dusk. "Too militaristic," says the third. "What if we say her voice is like cool water poured over warm stones?" They pause. "That one's good," they scribble it down in charcoal on the tablet, then fumble for parchment. It's always a race to write before confidence evaporates. Historians still argue whether these poems were ever actually sent. Some ended up in the Geniza. Others probably stayed hidden in drawers or behind loose stones in the walls. The best ones, perhaps, were whispered to the wind and never heard again. Tonight, one of the boys has brought a scrap of papyrus, carefully flattened and rubbed with beeswax to smooth the writing surface. He inscribes the latest draft using a stiff brush and ink that smells faintly of almonds. He plans to slip it inside the borrowed Mishnah volume his sister returns to the neighbor's house tomorrow. Will the girl read it? Maybe. Will she understand it? Harder to say, but that's not really the point. The writing itself, the act of putting emotion into words, wrestling Hebrew into tenderness, is what they'll remember. You step back as the boys argue over one last line, then fall silent when a father's footsteps approach on the stairs. The wax tablet vanishes. The poems disappear under cushions. One boy pretends to be asleep, the door creaks open. A head peeks in. "Studying hard, boys?" Mishnaic principles of marital obligation, one replies instantly, the head nods. The door closes, the moment passes, and then, like ink from a cracked pot, the poems begin again, this time in whispers. You smile. This is how romantic culture survives, not through grand declarations, but through quiet rebellion, shared laughter, and the warm hum of metaphor in the mouths of boys who barely know what they feel, but know they need to say it anyway. Morning again, but this time in a quieter town, maybe somewhere north of Cairo, or along the Levantine coast. You've wandered into a small alley where linen hangs like sails between buildings, and every step brings you closer to the soft clatter of looms and the hum of women's voices. Today, you're inside a household where the real work gets done, not in synagogues or study halls, but in the shared spaces of family life, the kitchen, the weaving room, the back courtyard where gossip travels faster than the pigeons overhead. And here, amid all this domestic rhythm, someone is editing a love letter. She's older than the others you've seen, mid-40s perhaps, with hands rough from soap and dye. A voice that carries, and eyes that have clearly read more than a few foolish boy poems in their day. She's not the writer. She's the fixer. You watch as her daughter, a nervous bride-to-be, hovers beside her, chewing her thumbnail as she reads the first draft aloud. "My beloved, your eyes are twin stars that light the heavens." The woman snorts. He's seen too many stars if he thinks that line will work. She grabs a quill and scratches out half the line. Too much metaphor. Not enough chutzpah. A replacement. Your gaze lingers longer than my aunt's stories, and makes more sense. It's sharper. And funnier. And somehow more real. The daughter blinks. But what if he thinks I'm mocking him? The mother shrugs. If he can't handle that, he's not husband material. This is what you've wandered into, a miniature editorial session over tea and rugula, part Talmud, part roast. You glance around, the letter now lies between a pot of lentils and a stack of laundry. On the floor nearby, a toddler sticks alphabet tiles to the wall using sticky figs. History is being made, just not where you expected it. Historians still debate the degree to which older women in Jewish households influenced courtship and matchmaking. While rabbis and male relatives wrote the contracts, it's clear the real emotional labor often happened here, in kitchens, on rooftops, between bites of fruit. The revised letter now includes a polite reference to the suitor's father's spice business, "May your words be as fragrant as your cloves," and a clever pun on the word ketubah that we won't even try to translate. Let's just say it's borderline scandalous and involves sheep. The mother sets down her pen, leans back, and nods. He'll have to reply to that. Or hide for a month. The daughter giggles nervously and reaches for the letter. But her mother stops her, "Don't touch it yet. Let the ink dry." Like good insults, timing matters. You step away as the paper flutters gently in the warm air, now resting on a linen cloth scented with lavender. The letter is ready. It may never be sent. Or it may arrive just in time to turn a polite arrangement into a decades-long dance of shared sarcasm. You pass by the open door and hear the mother mutter, "Boys today. They don't even know what makes a good line." But she smiles when she says it. By now, you've wandered far from the city centers, out to a desert village tucked between cracked hills and olive groves where life moves slower, and secrets travel by donkey cart. It's early afternoon, and the sun is high and insistent. You duck beneath a low clay arch and step into a shaded courtyard. The walls are whitewashed and flaking. A goat sleeps in the corner. Somewhere above, a pigeon makes a noise that sounds suspiciously like a rabbinical sigh, and there, under a fig tree, sits a boy, not quite old enough to marry, not quite young enough to admit he's thought about it. His feet are bare, his curls damp from well water, and in his lap, a worn, folded scrap of parchment. This letter isn't new. It's been read so often, the edges have become transparent. The ink is faded. The folds are permanent. You can tell by the way he touches it, like it's holy, or cursed, or both. He doesn't read it again. He already knows every word. Instead, he stares out over the dusty rooftops and imagines her, whoever she is. She might live 3 villages away. Or she might have moved. Or married. Or changed her name. All he knows is what she wrote once, long ago, "I dreamed of you among pomegranates, and woke with the taste of dust." Who writes like that? Apparently, she does. No one else knows about the letter. Not his parents, not the old shepherd who taught him how to salt cheese. Not even his best friend who suspects something but doesn't ask. He found the letter tucked inside a book on Jewish calendrical disputes, of all things, a forgotten whisper between pages of lunar charts and sabbatical laws, and ever since, he's been obsessed. He's tried writing back, of course. He has a drawer full of drafts. Some angry. Some aching. One that quotes 4 entire verses of Song of Songs and ends with a drawing of 2 goats kissing. None of them feel right. Historians still argue over how many love letters in the Geniza were ever actually delivered. Some were intercepted. Others were discarded, or lost in piles of halakhic debates. And some, like this one, simply outlived their moment, kept not because they served a purpose, but because they couldn't be let go. The boy now folds the letter again and tucks it into a small leather pouch. He hides it under a loose stone near the tree's roots. It's a ritual, almost. Read, remember, return. Like putting your heart into storage. Then he stands and stretches, dusting off his knees. The goat doesn't stir. He wanders toward the well, where the women are drawing water and the old men are arguing over whether the Sabbath begins at sundown or at the moment when 3 stars appear. He doesn't join them. He just watches, quietly, as if hoping someone might say her name without knowing why. The letter stays behind, hidden. Waiting. Maybe someday he'll send a reply. Maybe she'll return to the village and ask about a boy who stared too long at fig trees. Or maybe, just maybe, he'll write a poem so good, someone will find it 100 years later and think, whoever this was, he loved someone fiercely. You leave him there in the fading light, holding a bucket but thinking of metaphors. And behind you, the tree keeps growing, slowly, steadily, as all things do when watered by memory. The moon is high now, casting silver-blue light across the stone rooftops, and your steps are softer in the cool hush of night. You make your way toward a quieter quarter, one where widows live near each other and candles burn later than expected. Here, stories echo longer. In a modest home with creaky doors and lemon balm drying from the rafters, an older woman sits by lamplight. She isn't writing. She's remembering. Before her is a bundle, neatly tied with wool thread, soft from decades of handling. You lean in to see what lies inside. Not spices, not coins, but letters. Dozens of them. Some in Hebrew, some in Judeo-Arabic, and one or two in a hand so rushed it could be mistaken for medical instructions. Were such things medieval? She unties the bundle and reads slowly. Her eyes don't move across the page like a student's, they drift, pause, close for a moment, then reopen. One letter begins, "The market smelled of almonds today, and I thought of your hair." Another, "I have 3 figs and no appetite, what curse have you sent me?" The woman chuckles. You realize that every letter here was sent to her once, many years ago. A correspondence that lasted across seasons and cities, across illness and recovery, maybe even across a border or two. Some letters include poetry. Others, mundane things, "Tell your cousin to stop overcharging me for olives." This, too, was love, not the kind you see in plays or scribbled in wine margins, but the slow, written unfolding of 2 lives entwined. Letter by letter, like building a house out of parchment and memory, she selects one, yellowed and stained, and reads it aloud, just above a whisper. It's written entirely in Arabic, flowing right to left like a river. "If I am dust, let me rest on your shelf. If I am wind, let me pass through your window." You notice the corner is smudged, as though kissed. Or wept on. Historians still wonder about bundles like this, found in Geniza storerooms, tied together with string, saved despite no obvious legal value. Why keep them? Were they forgotten, or preserved deliberately? Some say they were hidden during remarriages. Others say they were tucked away because the owner could not bear to destroy the only proof that someone once wrote, "I see you, tonight." The woman refolds the letters with care. She doesn't read them all. That would be too much. Just a few lines to warm the chest, like a sip of something brewed on the stove and too sweet to admit you still crave. You look around the room. A small oil lamp flickers beside a faded cushion. On the shelf, a wooden comb, a broken amulet, a needle stuck into the wall. Life, pressed into objects. Emotion, stored in envelopes. The woman hums a lullaby to no one. Or perhaps to him. Then she ties the bundle again and places it into a cloth bag behind the water jar. Somewhere secret, but not hidden. Because this kind of memory isn't shameful, it's sacred, she leans back. Eyes closed. The lamp burns lower. You feel the room settle, as if even the furniture knows to be quiet now. Somewhere in the next room, a granddaughter sleeps. And one day, perhaps, she'll find the bundle. And read. And wonder, and maybe, just maybe, write one of her own. The sun is back, bold and golden, flooding the stone streets with warmth and the low murmur of morning prayers. You follow the sound to a small study hall tucked between 2 bakeries. It smells like warm bread and old ink, a scent you're starting to associate with emotional vulnerability disguised as scholarship. Inside, a scholar sits hunched over a page. But he's not reading a sacred text, not today. He's decoding something much more dangerous, his teenage daughter's discarded love letter. You linger in the doorway. He doesn't notice, the letter is unsigned. It's written in fluid Judeo-Arabic, the grammar a little too perfect to be hers, the metaphors suspiciously floral. Still, there's no mistaking the truth. Someone's been whispering to his daughter through paper. He squints. Reads a line twice. Then underlines it with a bone stylus. "The scent of saffron on your scarf still haunts me," he mutters. "Saffron's too expensive for a scarf." That's already suspicious. You watch as he analyzes the letter like it's a Babylonian contract. He's looking for clues. Who wrote it? When? Was it sent openly or smuggled? Is it from that boy who pretends to study halakha but blushes at the sight of pomegranates? Historians still puzzle over these intergenerational literary entanglements. In many Geniza fragments, fathers annotated their daughters' love letters, correcting grammar or angrily circling ambiguous lines. Some even wrote replies in their daughters' names, "Bless them for trying, this father isn't furious." Just baffled, he reads on, "Your silence leaves a space wider than the Negev, goof," he whispers. That's either love or someone's been studying hyperbole. You wonder what he'll do. Confiscate the letter? Burn it? Deliver it himself and then scowl in the doorway while pretending not to care? No. He folds it gently, slides it into a stack of papers, and sighs. Later that day, he'll call his daughter into the study. He won't mention the letter. He'll ask whether she's keeping up with her reading. He'll say the weather is changing, and maybe she should wear a shawl. A saffron-colored one, perhaps. Then he'll hand her a fresh sheet of parchment. "For your exercises," he'll say, too casually, and she'll know. And he'll know she knows. You linger just long enough to see him open a blank page and, quietly, carefully, begin writing something of his own. Not a reply. Not a lecture, just a memory. Maybe about her mother. Maybe about a letter he once received and never answered. Maybe about saffron. The ink flows easily. You step out into the midday brightness, where everything, the cobblestones, the chickens, even the stray cats, seems drowsy with heat. But somewhere behind a shuttered window, a different kind of heat is simmering, a matchmaking session. No, not the arranged marriage kind that gets notarized and announced with fanfare. This is something quieter, more subtle. You're inside the home of a professional go-between, an elderly widow who knows every family's secrets and trades in possibility like a street vendor hawking pears. She's not alone. Across the table sits a mother, tense as a drawn bowstring. Between them lies a pile of notes, crumpled letters, name cards, folded scraps with hastily written details. Son of Moshe the dyer. Studies in Tiberias, owns 2 goats, recites psalms willingly. You watch the matchmaker sort them with the calm precision of someone handling a game of dominoes. She picks up one and squints. This one quotes the Talmud in his letters, she mutters. But also signs them with a sketch of a fish. Curious. The mother nods. He's very spiritual. Or deeply indecisive, the matchmaker replies. She moves on. Another candidate, writes in Aramaic but includes Arabic proverbs for flair. Owns a small orchard. Sends dried figs with every note. The matchmaker raises an eyebrow. Either he's thoughtful or allergic to commitment. The mother doesn't laugh. This is serious business. You glance around the room. Ink bottles line the shelf. A letter opener shaped like a lion's claw sits beside a worn copy of Ketubot. Hanging above it all is a map of marriages she's arranged, with little pins connecting families across Cairo, Jerusalem, Fez, and even as far as Sicily. Historians still debate how much power these informal matchmakers had. Officially, marriage arrangements were the domain of fathers and rabbinical courts. But the real emotional negotiations, the sighs, the rejections, the maybe let's try someone more poetic, happened in spaces like this, over tea and judgment. The matchmaker now reads aloud from a letter written by a potential groom. If your laughter were a spice, it would be cinnamon, sharp, warm, and slightly dangerous. She squints. That's not bad. The mother looks skeptical. The matchmaker shrugs. At least he didn't compare her to an olive press. We've made progress. In a corner, a small wax tablet records each name, each draft match, each poetic offense. The matchmaker scratches one name out dramatically. Cross out the scribe who said she reminded him of a Torah scroll, she mutters. She's 16, not sacred scripture. You stifle a laugh. But there's something deeply touching about this space, how seriously they take words, how letters become proxies for futures, how a single sentence can tilt an entire life. You watch as the matchmaker selects one letter from the pile. Short, humble, no metaphors, but with a closing line that reads, "I can't promise you pomegranates, but I'll peel them for you gladly." She looks up. "We'll start with this one." And just like that, a name moves to the top of the pile. A life tilts toward another. Not yet married. Not yet even introduced, but now. Slightly closer, evening again. The sky fades into plum and rose, and oil lamps wink to life one by one like shy stars. You wander through a quieter neighborhood now, one of scholars and scribes, where the streets smell faintly of ink, old books, and damp linen. You're following the sound of soft scratching, quill on parchment, coming from a side room behind a synagogue. Inside, a man sits at a low desk, hunched like a question mark, scribbling by lamplight. His hair is silver at the temples. His fingers are stained dark with ink. His tunic bears the unmistakable pattern of someone who's worked all day and forgotten to eat. He is not writing Holy Scripture tonight. Not a contract. Not a sermon, he's ghostwriting a love letter. You blink. That's a job, oh yes. In fact, it was quite a thing in medieval Jewish communities. Some scribes were known not only for copying Talmudic commentaries but also for crafting delicately worded expressions of admiration, longing, or, in at least one case, passive-aggressive proposals involving cheese metaphors. This scribe is known for being discreet. Clever, and fast. You approach quietly. He doesn't notice. His lips are moving silently as he tests out the rhythm of the lines. "Your name," he writes, "curves through my thoughts like script on damp parchment, fragile, but enduring." He pauses. Frowns. Crosses it out, like spice in warm wine, subtle, and remembered, better. Next to him is a small stack of previous commissions, one from a young baker who was too shy to say anything in person, another from a merchant's widow flirting with a teacher in Tiberias, and one from a hopeful husband trying to rekindle affection after a failed attempt to build an indoor latrine. You'd be amazed what people think love looks like. Historians still debate whether these scribes merely polished others' words or fully invented the voice of the lover. Some letters in the Geniza are signed by one hand but clearly composed by another, often with the kind of elegance that doesn't match a chicken seller's vocabulary. Tonight, this scribe takes particular care with the ending. "If love were ink, I would be dry, but I would borrow yours gladly." He copies the finished text onto thick parchment, sprinkles sand across it to dry, and folds it with the practiced grace of someone who's folded many futures. Then, gently, he slips it into a waxed envelope and seals it, not with a name, but with a tiny pressed fig leaf. No signature. No trace. Just words sent out into the world like doves, hoping to land in soft hands. He leans back, stretches his neck, and mutters a blessing under his breath, not for the letter, but for whoever reads it. Let them find what they're looking for. Or at least a good story. You linger at the door as he blows out the lamp. For a moment, everything is dark. Then, in the silence, you hear the creak of the stool, the rustle of paper, and the soft click of the door as he leaves, parchment bundle under his arm. The street is quiet again. But somewhere soon, someone will blush as they read that letter, and they'll never know who really wrote it. You're outside now. Walking along the ancient city wall. The night air smells of stone, smoke, and wild thyme. Somewhere nearby, a rooster is confused about the time and crows once, then thinks better of it. But up ahead, glowing faintly through lattice shutters, is something rare, a woman's study. You step inside to find a young woman seated cross-legged on a carpet, scribal tools spread out before her. A candle flickers beside a bowl of dates. She doesn't look up. She's copying something with total focus. But this isn't scripture, and it's not a letter she intends to send. She's transcribing a private anthology, a self-made collection of love poems from the Geniza and beyond, not just her own words. But others too. Bits of Judeo-Arabic verse from a merchant's son in Tunisia. Snatches of Hebrew poetry by a rabbi's daughter in Provence. Even a few lines in Persian, lovingly copied even though she doesn't quite understand them. You realize, she's making a book. A hidden library of yearning. Women like her were often educated quietly, informally, through older sisters, sympathetic tutors, or stolen hours with texts meant for male eyes. But make no mistake, she knows exactly what she's doing. She selects each poem for rhythm, bite, and meaning. She annotates them lightly, in the margins. Too dramatic, reminds me of Rivka, this one is dangerous. Her handwriting is neat but unadorned. The lines flow right to left across pages made of patched-together parchment scraps. A careful, deliberate act of archival devotion. Historians still debate whether Jewish women had access to literary culture beyond religious texts. Many claim they did not. And yet, here she is. The anthology isn't just about love, it's about voice. She is gathering whispers, sighs, little rebellions tucked into poetic meter. A girl in Fez wrote my heart is a stolen orange, and here it is, rescued from rot. She adds her own piece, hesitates, then decides, yes. It belongs. When he smiled, I forgot 3 languages, and remembered the shape of rain. You smile, she doesn't sign her name. No need. If the book is ever found, if it ever survives, the words will speak for her. She wraps it in a silk cloth and tucks it into a box beneath her bed, alongside a broken mirror, a piece of rose quartz, and a letter she never sent. You step back, careful not to disturb the silence. The candle gutters once, then steadies. Her hand resumes its steady motion across the page. And the city exhales. The street you follow now is narrow, barely wide enough for 2 people to pass without brushing robes, and it smells richly of cinnamon, cardamom, and ink. You've entered the market quarter, but not for dates or cloth. No, this section of the city sells something far stranger, letters. Welcome to the stall of a professional letter broker, a figure half postman, half secret keeper, part gossip, part spy. His little shop is wedged between a lamp repairer and a shop that only sells pickled things. You'd miss it if not for the sign dangling above the lintel, correspondence facilitated, no questions asked. Inside, you find a man with a long, bird-like nose and ink-stained thumbs. He's sorting through bundles of folded parchment like a grocer weighing apricots. Some are wrapped in twine, others sealed with wax in the shape of fish, figs, or, on one particularly nervous letter, a tiny crying eye. He looks up, eyes sharp. Delivering or retrieving? You say nothing. You're just here to watch. People come and go, some quickly, heads lowered, others drawn in by curiosity or desperation. One woman, veiled and silent, leaves a note wrapped in a twist of mint. A boy enters carrying a letter folded inside the hollow of a loaf of bread. The broker checks it for moisture, nods, and slips it into a satchel marked Alexandria. You're fascinated. This is more than delivery. It's emotional logistics, love letters, apology notes, breakup poems, coded messages passed between lovers from rival families. In a world without reliable mail, this man is the last bridge between hope and silence. Historians still debate how widespread informal courier systems were in the medieval Jewish world. The Geniza is full of half-sentences referencing "our friend in the spice lane" or "the man with the yellow shoes," shorthand for trusted brokers who carried words across cities, deserts, and occasionally hostile checkpoints. This broker is selective. He refuses letters that feel too dramatic. One scroll he throws into the stove with a muttered, "You'll thank me later." The fire flickers. The letter pops. You feel something like heartbreak evaporate into the air. You watch as he seals another letter, carefully. Reverently, with a single dried pomegranate seed pressed into the wax. "A nice touch," he says to no one, and then, for a fee, he offers delivery confirmation. Not a signature, there were no digital receipts here. Instead, he agrees to whisper 3 words from the letter into the recipient's ear at the moment of handoff. You don't ask how he manages that, he's a broker. He knows doors. And hearts. You step back out onto the street, blinking in the sun. Behind you, he sorts another pile, humming an old Sephardic tune as he works. And somewhere, a lover waits. A reply lingers. And a broker, ink-stained, sharp-eyed, soft-spoken, moves the wheels of romance forward, one folded dream at a time. As dusk settles again, you find yourself walking into a quieter part of town, a neighborhood of storerooms, synagogues, and half-forgotten stairwells. Here, words go to rest. You push open a thick, wooden door, just slightly warped by centuries of Cairo humidity, and step into a chamber that smells of parchment, beeswax, and distant memory. Welcome to the Geniza. It's not impressive at first glance. Just a high, dusty room with mismatched shelves and bundles of manuscripts tied together with faded string. But to the initiated, this is sacred ground. A Geniza, by Jewish tradition, is a storage space for sacred texts that are no longer usable. But the Jews of medieval Fustat went further. They placed everything with Hebrew lettering here. Shopping lists, business receipts, scribbled notes about borrowed chickens, and, most beautifully, letters, love letters. Especially, you climb up onto a creaky wooden ladder and pull down a packet. The twine snaps too easily. Pages spill into your hands like quiet confessions. The first is in Judeo-Arabic. I watched you walk past the spice vendor. The sun lit your scarf. I forgot the price of cinnamon. You smile. The second is less poetic. Please return my boots. You know the ones. You're not sure which hits harder. You sift through pages, ink smudged by time, folded and unfolded until the creases run like veins. Here are letters written by wives to absent husbands, unsure if they'll ever return from trading voyages. Here's a note from a girl thanking her tutor for correcting my spelling, and also for being kind. There's a letter signed only with the phrase, "Your moonlight." Always. You pause. That one lingers. Historians still marvel at the Geniza's depth, over 300,000 fragments, each a shard of daily Jewish life from the 9th to the 19th century. It's been called a paper time capsule, a confessional box, a literary archaeology site, but tonight, you feel none of the grandeur. Just the intimacy. You come across a letter with no opening, only the middle. And if you still remember my voice, I hope it speaks kindly. You wonder, did the other half survive? Was it lost, or destroyed, or kept under someone's pillow until the ink faded into nothing? Some papers are sealed. Some are torn. Some are stained with wine, others with what might be tears. One has a tiny pressed flower inside, withered, yes, but somehow still beautiful. You return the bundle gently to its place. The Geniza isn't just an archive. It's a cemetery for conversations. A graveyard of unmailed hopes. A sanctuary for voices that someone, once, was afraid to throw away, and you feel oddly comforted. Because even in silence, these letters matter. They were written. They were saved. And now, they are remembered. You step out into the evening. The door creaks shut behind you, and far above, stars blink awake, little witnesses, lighting the sky like scattered punctuation marks on the love letters of the universe. Tonight, the city is unusually still. You walk past shuttered stalls and sleeping dogs, following the faint glow of a lamp high up in a narrow alley. It flickers behind a stained glass window patterned in cobalt and honey. You climb slowly, rung by uneven rung, until you reach a door with a mezuzah so worn its script is nearly gone. Inside, an old man sits cross-legged on a rug. He wears spectacles so thick they distort his eyes into gentle moons. Before him lies a box, lacquered, ornate, and surprisingly modern for its surroundings. You found one of the last letter collectors of the quarter. He motions for you to sit. No words. Just a nod. From the box, he removes a letter written in 1135. You can tell by the creased folds and the ink that has turned a soft brown. The script is Judeo-Persian, elegant and strange, curling around the page like a vine. It's a letter from a Jewish merchant in Nishaper to his wife, thanking her for sending a silver thimble and regretting, tenderly, that he cannot yet return. Then he opens another, written centuries later. Judeo-Spanish, this time. From a refugee woman in Thessaloniki to her daughter, left behind in Iberia. Her grief is quiet, tightly bound in each syllable. She signs, Tu madre, que aún canta tus canciones. Your mother, who still sings your songs, the old man doesn't read these aloud. He simply places them side by side. Carefully aligned, like he's orchestrating a duet across time, letter after letter follows, from Yemen, Morocco, Byzantium, Vilna, Cordoba. Some stained with wax, others embossed with fingerprints. Some are heartbreaking. Others are hilariously mundane. Historians still debate whether these collectors preserved letters out of devotion, nostalgia, or sheer eccentricity. But here, in this room lit by one stubborn flame, it's clear, they were saving voices. He opens one last envelope. It's addressed to no one. Written in Hebrew, but the grammar is childlike. Perhaps a boy's first attempt. It reads, "When I grow up, I will write like the rabbi. But also like Mama. She writes prettier." You laugh quietly. So does the old man. It's the gentlest moment you've had all night. Beside him is a drawer labeled unsent. Inside are dozens of letters that never made it to their destination, perhaps because the recipient moved, or died, or because the writer lost courage, and yet. The words remain. Before you leave, he offers you a letter. Not to keep, but to carry, briefly. It's in Yiddish, crumpled and sweet. "If you find my brother, tell him our goat had twins. And also that I forgive him." You carry it down the stairs as if it's made of glass. Outside, the wind is warm. You don't know who the brother was. Or what the fight had been. But the forgiveness, that part is yours to hold. For now, and you hope, just maybe, it reached him anyway. Dawn is a gentle rumor spreading across the rooftops, and the city yawns awake. Chickens cluck. A donkey brays in protest. But you slip through the back of a courtyard where the marble is still cool underfoot and the fountain babbles like a half-asleep storyteller. You're here for something different now, not a letter being written or saved, but one being taught. A young boy sits cross-legged beside an older woman, his grandmother, perhaps. She holds a folded letter in her hand, yellowed but intact. The boy leans close, eyes wide, as she traces the first line with her finger. "My dearest Rivka, the moonlight here reminds me of the salt in your bread." He giggles. "That's silly," he says. "Bread doesn't shine." She grins. "That's why it's poetry." She reads the rest slowly, letting the rhythm do the teaching. You notice, she's not correcting him, not drilling vocabulary. She's passing down emotional literacy, how to hear longing in a sentence, how to recognize the curve of a joke, how to sit with a question that might never get answered. The boy asks, "Who wrote this?" She shrugs. "Someone with too much heart and too little sense." "Then, maybe your grandfather." He laughs again. But you see the curiosity bloom behind his grin. Historians still discuss how literary memory was transmitted in Jewish households, not just through schools or sermons, but across tables. While kneading dough, braiding hair, or rereading old letters like bedtime stories, she hands him a fresh sheet of paper. "Now you try," she says. He hesitates. Writes slowly, "To someone I will meet when I'm older. I hope you like stories." You blink. The grandmother reads it, nods approvingly, and tucks it between two stones in the courtyard wall. "Let it sleep there for a while," she whispers. "A ritual, perhaps. A tradition only this family knows. Or maybe one passed down through so many generations, its origin is lost but the meaning remains." You look around the courtyard. Pomegranates glisten in the morning sun. A cat stretches on a windowsill. Somewhere a rooster finally remembers his job and lets out a late crow. In that courtyard, past and future hold hands, across letters, lessons, and the sacred joy of putting pen to paper, just to say, "I am here. I care. I remember." The sun climbs higher now, and so do you, up winding stairs carved into stone, toward the attic of a building that once served as a yeshiva, then a grain store, and now something in between. The dust up here is thick enough to sketch your name in, but it smells oddly pleasant, like ink, linen, and old hopes. This is where forgotten letters come to rest, not the Geniza. This isn't sacred ground. This is something more human, more accidental, the junk drawer of Jewish literary history. A space where scribes stashed drafts. Merchants tossed duplicates, and heartbroken teenagers may have flung the first, and second, attempts at emotional honesty. A trunk sits against the wall. Its hinges groan when opened, as if they've been asleep for centuries. Inside, a chaos of paper. You pull out a crumpled note, to the girl in the green scarf. Your laugh is worse than your penmanship, but both are perfect. Next, a letter never sent, ink splattered by what looks suspiciously like tears, or perhaps just very aggressive hummus. You read on. Historians still argue whether these attic archives were intentional repositories or just convenient forgetfulness. Either way, they're gold. One letter stands out, a draft. Heavily edited, full of crossed-out metaphors and impatient margin notes like "no too corny." It ends abruptly. If you knew how I felt, no, not felt, say something smarter, and then nothing. You can picture him, some 14th century boy chewing on a quill, muttering to himself, rewriting his soul until he gave up and went to synagogue instead. Another parchment reads, "If your silence is an answer, I will listen to it like Torah." Underneath that, someone scrawled, "You dramatic goat." Maybe it was a sibling. This attic is full of such echoes, jokes with no punchline, sorrows that never got mailed, declarations that felt brave at midnight but cowardly by dawn. One note, hastily folded, has only 5 words. Did you ever read this? And you suddenly ache, not for the author, but for whoever was meant to answer. You sit down beside the trunk. Light filters through a broken shutter, striping the room with gold. For a moment, you are utterly still, surrounded by ghosts of vulnerability, because even in their messiest forms, these fragments matter. They show that someone tried. That someone risked sincerity, even if imperfectly. That someone, somewhere, once wrote a letter and hoped it would be enough. You return now to where you began, beneath a shaded portico, where vines curl lazily up wooden beams and the scent of warm bread drifts in from a nearby kitchen. The city hums softly, awake, alive, unchanged and yet completely transformed in your eyes. You've wandered through letters lost and letters delivered, ones composed by candlelight and ones whispered between alleyways. You've peeked into the minds of scribes, matchmakers, poets, children, and the unrequited. But now, you sit down. And for once, you don't look, you listen. The wind carries faint voices. You hear the gentle cadence of Judeo-Arabic, the brisk bounce of Yiddish, the stately scroll of Hebrew. They're not loud. They're not arguing Talmud or announcing royal edicts. They're murmuring the most human of things. Are you thinking of me? Did I say too much? What if this never arrives? Will you remember this letter after I'm gone? You close your eyes. One by one, they return. The woman who wrote in secret by moonlight, the boy who wrote his first draft and hid it in the wall, the merchant who compared longing to spices, the lover who used a dried fig leaf for a seal, the scribe who borrowed ink to express someone else's heart. Historians still argue about the purpose of these letters. Were they spiritual, emotional, social? Were they preserved intentionally, or simply forgotten? But you've seen what they left behind. Not facts, not dates, not footnotes. Feelings. Echoes. Quiet declarations in ink that somehow outlived plagues, exiles, empires. You look down. In your hands, without knowing how, it seems you're holding a letter. It's addressed to you. The script is familiar. You've seen it in dreams. It says, "To the one who came late, but stayed long enough to listen, thank you. These were our hearts." You carried them gently. You fold it carefully. You tuck it into your coat, next to your own heartbeat. You stand. The streets are bright now. Somewhere, a new letter is being written. And maybe, just maybe, it'll find its way, too. Let's slow everything down now. The parchment is put away. The letters folded. The voices, softer. The sun has begun to dip behind the rooftops of ancient homes. You imagine the scent of fresh ink slowly fading. Replaced by warm bread, citrus peels drying in the window, the low rustle of linen being hung for the evening. The couriers are resting. The matchmakers have put away their name cards. And even the letter collectors, who guard their bundles like treasure, have finally leaned back in their chairs and closed their eyes. There's peace here. A piece not built from silence, but from stories finished. You think back on all the people you met on this journey. The boy with the nervous poem. The grandmother passing on literary mischief. The ghostwriter scribbling someone else's passion with the care of a sacred ritual, all of them trying to say something simple and terrifying: I care. And now you, dear listener, have heard them. They've made it, across deserts. Across centuries. Across languages and empires and oceans, they've arrived, and maybe, just maybe, their voices helped you soften too. Helped you rest, so breathe, let the stillness come. Let the thoughts scatter like petals in the wind, you don't need to remember every line. The feeling is enough, sleep gently, traveler of words. Tomorrow will come, but for now, stay right here, with us. You are warm. You are welcome. You are exactly where you're supposed to be.